Alex, a 36-year-old man, was my college sweetheart with his captivating eyes and robust, muscular build. He delighted in playfully lifting me up to tease me. We were married in a lovely church ceremony and enjoyed a delightful decade together. Our relationship was widely admired, and our friends often expressed their envy. As a 36-year-old woman, I adored Alex wholeheartedly, dreaming of a future where we would age side by side. Alex proved to be an extraordinary husband, demonstrating consistent commitment to our marriage and family. His loyalty, fidelity, and dependability stood out, and he prioritized my happiness and well-being, treating me with dignity, compassion, and understanding, ensuring I always felt cherished and valued. He was attentive to my concerns and always ready to lend a hand. Alex fully supported my ambitions and aspirations, providing advice and assistance when asked. He was patient and empathetic, striving to view things from my angle. Honesty was his principle, and he maintained forthright and open communication, never hiding or withholding vital information from me, valuing honest conversations. I was proud of my choice in a husband and valued his reliability, though a bit more excitement wouldn't have gone amiss. One day I met Ethan, a 22-year-old man, at a business conference. We immediately connected, and I was taken by Ethan's allure and appeal. We exchanged numbers and soon began regular chats and text messages. I knew it was inappropriate to interact with another man in this manner, but I was drawn in. My interactions with Ethan quickly intensified, leading to secret meetings and eventually an affair. I felt guilty whenever I was with Ethan, but his charm was too enticing. He sparked a sense of vitality and passion that had been missing in my relationship with Alex for some time. I was fully aware of my misconduct but found myself unable to end it. I was trapped in a tangled web of lies and deceit, consuming my thoughts. I loved Alex deeply, yet I also harbored strong feelings for Ethan. When Alex uncovered my affair with Ethan, he was devastated. He could not understand why I would betray him. I tried to explain my unhappiness in our marriage and how Ethan made me feel rejuvenated, but Alex was too hurt to listen. He only perceived the emotional betrayal, unaware of the physical aspect, which I feared would devastate him further. Alex urged me to terminate the affair and focus on our marriage, but I was conflicted between my love for him and my feelings for Ethan, though I kept this turmoil hidden to avoid hurting him further. Then one day, while out walking, I encountered an elderly couple holding hands, radiating happiness and satisfaction. This sight ignited envy in me and made me appreciate what I had with Alex. I decided to reach out to Alex for a comprehensive discussion about our marriage. I gathered the courage to be transparent with him about my feelings of neglect and discontent, and he listened attentively. He declared his love and his willingness to improve our relationship, but emphasized that I needed to end my involvement with Ethan. It was a hard decision, but I knew it was the correct one. I informed Ethan that our relationship was over. Ethan was heartbroken, but understood my decision. I realized the deep hurt I had inflicted on both men, but was determined to repair my marriage. In the months that followed, Alex and I committed to enhancing our relationship. We sought counseling to improve our communication abilities and rekindled our romance by going on dates and rediscovering the activities we loved together. When our relationship first blossomed, it became clear to me that I had taken Alex for granted, and he was the person I truly loved. Eventually, Alex forgave me for my indiscretion, and we moved past our old issues. We grew closer than ever, reinforcing my decision that choosing Alex over Ethan was the correct path. I realized that the grass isn't always greener on the other side, and sometimes what we need is right in front of us. Alex and I reached new heights in our relationship. I received lovely bouquets of roses at both my workplace and home, accompanied by affectionately signed cards from him, all expressing his deep love. Despite this ideal scenario, I still found myself longing for Ethan's company. Even considering reconnecting with him felt wrong, yet I couldn't resist. Despite my resolve, my physical desires weakened my willpower. Against my better judgment, I reached out to Ethan, declaring my love and proposing we reignite our clandestine affair. He confessed he missed me too, and our affair resumed with more passion than before. Alex was completely unaware. I was meticulous in covering my tracks, both in the real world and online. With Alex's week-long trip to another state imminent, I informed Ethan, eagerly anticipating spending unrestricted time together at my place. The day arrived, and though a tearful Alex expressed his sadness at leaving, inside I felt a sense of liberation. Less than half an hour after his departure, Ethan arrived at our house, his face full of excitement. Without initial pleasantries, he carried me toward the bedroom. I ignored some noises downstairs, completely engrossed in the moment with Ethan. Yet, not even 2 minutes later, Alex stood in the bedroom doorway, shocked to find me in our marital bed with another man. He exclaimed in disbelief at my betrayal, despite having trusted and forgiven me before, providing me with everything. Overwhelmed and at a loss for words, I quickly covered myself and tried to follow him downstairs to explain, but it was too late. Within an hour, Alex sent a text ordering me to leave his house. I promptly sent Ethan away and began packing, uncertain of my future. Ultimately, I returned to my mother's house. I tried repeatedly to contact Alex through messages and calls, but he did not respond. A week later, divorce papers arrived. Alex didn't seek further dialogue, therapy, or reconciliation, but swiftly moved towards a divorce, leaving me to reflect on how much I truly meant to him. Further complicating matters, my mother had insisted on a prenuptial agreement, so the assets and earnings acquired during our marriage were distributed according to our individual incomes, with Alex receiving 80% of our properties due to his higher earnings. I was left with little, no home of my own, and ineligible for child support as, despite our efforts, we had not managed to conceive. Surviving these conditions seemed overwhelming, and life felt remarkably unfair. That was a dramatic story, but now let's move on to another engaging narrative. Stay tuned, and let's dive in. My wife is 45 years old, and I am 51. We have been married for a quarter century, living in the Midwest and working as farmers. Our family includes our 18-year-old daughter, who just started college, and our son, who tragically passed away 5 years ago. He would have been 20. My relationship with my wife began when I started working for her grandparents, who were also farmers focused on raising cattle and cultivating crops like corn and wheat. After her parents separated, she found greater happiness living with her grandparents. At 18, she decided to move in with her grandparents and contribute to their farm. My wife stands out because she is not your typical woman, which is one of the things that makes her extraordinary. She boasts beauty with her flowing blonde hair and maintains excellent fitness. She isn't hesitant to work hard and get dirty on the job, taking superb care of our animals. Her proficiency with farm tools and machinery is impressive. When I first met her 30 years ago, I was struck by both her appearance and her skills. Meeting a small-town girl who was both resilient and appealing was a rare experience for me. She genuinely enjoyed spending time with the workers on her grandparents' farm, and she was well liked by everyone. I was merely a rural lad who had been raised on farms and knew little else. My parents were also farmers, but they did not achieve the same level of success as my wife's grandparents, who were exceptionally accomplished. When my wife turned 19, we began dating. We shared an excellent working rapport, and it seemed inevitable that we would marry. Things were progressing smoothly, particularly since our son displayed a natural aptitude for farming, much like both of us. He was proactive and often managed farm tasks independently without needing direction. Then, tragically, one day while driving his truck on I-94, a large 18-wheeler lost control and collided with his truck, resulting in his immediate death. The loss we suffered was profoundly devastating, and my wife especially found it incredibly tough to cope with our son's absence. Following our son's funeral, a drastic change overtook her. She transformed entirely, becoming almost unrecognizable. This change profoundly affected various aspects of her life. She reduced her activity and participation on the farm dramatically and instead spent entire days in bed. She started to struggle with an anxiety disorder, which made her excessively clingy, both physically and emotionally. Her level of attachment intensified, exceeding what it had been before. I found it increasingly difficult just to leave for work in the morning or to take care of our daughter. Her demeanor shifted to a predominantly negative tone, a stark contrast to her former self. It seemed she had become the opposite of who she was before our son's demise. At night, achieving personal space in bed was challenging. She developed a strong need to cuddle all night, but her grip was so firm that it made breathing tough, akin to being in a hold by a Muay Thai fighter. Even when it appeared she was asleep, she clung tightly. She seemed to need frequent kisses throughout the night, a behavior quite unlike her prior to our son's accident. Our intimate life also underwent drastic changes, whereas we were previously moderately active, being intimate 2 or 3 times a week. After our son's death, the frequency escalated dramatically to almost twice daily or more, even when I wasn't inclined. This occurred while we were still mourning our son. I realized this intense need for closeness was her way of grieving, exhibiting a level of clinginess I had never observed in her before. There are times when I don't feel like engaging in intimacy, and I express my reluctance. Initially, she seems to ignore my protests, desiring it so much that I hesitate to upset her by refusing. During those moments, it feels like our activities only cater to her interests, and I don't get to express my preferences or desires. It appears that the focus is solely on what pleases her, leading our intimate moments to revolve more around satisfying her needs. I began to question whether this behavior is becoming something I need to do for her to find happiness, as a coping mechanism for her, rather than an activity we both enjoy out of mutual love. She tends to become upset over trivial matters, turning almost everything into an argument. From time to time, when she recovers from her low spirits, she becomes expressive about the state of the farm and occasionally directs her frustration towards our workers. During this time, there was a 14-year-old boy who would come to the farm to help us. His parents struggled with substance abuse and addiction to pills. Since he was frequently around, I suggested to my wife that we consider adopting him, given his situation with neglectful parents. However, she initially strongly opposed the idea. The young boy continued to come to the farm to assist us, and unexpectedly, my wife began to take a liking to him. She mentioned that he reminded her of our son, which initially concerned me, but I didn't dwell on it too much. About a year later, my wife's condition had improved, and a significant part of this improvement was due to the now 15-year-old boy. He and my wife developed a close bond, but I wasn't concerned about it because I knew he was a good and responsible young man. My wife took the initiative and proposed that we officially adopt the boy to have him spend more time with us, though he was already around quite often. This adoption was meant to formalize things. Once the adoption process was completed, there was a noticeable positive shift in the atmosphere at home, and my wife's mood improved significantly. I observed that my wife and our adopted son were growing extremely close, engaging in late-night conversations after I had gone to bed. She often stayed up much later than her usual bedtime, while I tended to go to bed early since my days began before sunrise. My mornings started with a trip to the barn to attend to the cattle, ensuring they had enough food and fresh water because their health was a top priority. I also carefully examined them for any signs of illness or injury and administered any necessary medications. Once I finished looking after the cattle, I moved on to the fields where we grew corn. During planting season, I was quite busy preparing the soil and planting corn seeds, often with the assistance of my adopted son. When it was the season for the corn to grow, my responsibility was to monitor the progress of the corn plants, ensuring they received the appropriate amount of water and nutrients. Sometimes I had to use irrigation to provide proper hydration and apply fertilizers for their nourishment. I also kept a close eye out for any pests or diseases that could harm the corn crop. Depending on the time of year, I might have various tasks to handle. For instance, during harvest time, my adopted son and I, along with some hired hands who were usually close friends of mine, had to oversee the process of gathering the corn using specialized machinery like combine harvesters to efficiently collect the right corn. After collecting the corn, my responsibility extended to ensuring it was properly stored and transported to various destinations as needed, such as for animal feed or sale. Initially, I wasn't concerned about the close relationship between my wife and adopted son, especially since my daughter also spent time with them. 2 years after our son's tragic passing, life appeared to be slowly returning to normal despite the loss. Our son's memory remained alive in my heart, a constant presence in my daily life. Strangely, my wife seemed to have coped in a peculiar manner by developing an unusually strong bond with our adopted son. They would often share hugs and watch TV together under a blanket. Over time, this became a common sight that didn't strike me as unusual. Our intimate life underwent significant changes, dwindling to about once every 2 weeks. It didn't concern me too much as I felt I was getting too old for frequent bedroom activities. After a long day at work, I often lacked the energy for it. Both my adopted son and I dedicated a substantial part of our days to attending to the cattle and managing the cornfields. However, there were also administrative tasks handled by my wife and daughter, such as keeping track of expenses, maintaining records for both the cattle and the corn, and managing paperwork related to regulations or sales. There was one specific day that heightened my suspicions about my wife's interactions with our adopted son. This occurred when I was unable to find my adopted son and started looking for him. We owned a separate barn area that included our office where my wife usually spent a lot of her time. I headed towards the office door because I suspected that my adopted son might be there. Right outside the door, I spotted his muddy shoes, which suggested that he was probably inside. The office door had a broken lock mechanism that prevented it from being locked from the inside. Upon opening the door, it seemed that I had inadvertently interrupted something between my wife and our adopted son. There was a brief moment when their faces showed they were taken by surprise. However, at that time I did not consider what I thought I had seen. Fast forward 3 years and our daughter turned 18, departing for college. This meant that at home it was mainly just myself, our adopted son, and my wife during the harvest season. We had extra help on the farm after a long day's work. It was usual for us to go to a bar for some drinks. However, since my adopted son was not yet 19 and under the legal drinking age, he would usually go back to the house early as the day ended. I told the other workers to continue without me, explaining that I had a few last tasks to complete. I wanted to do a final check on the cattle to make sure they were settled for the night. After finishing this task, I took the time needed to ensure that all our equipment was properly stored for the night. Oddly, I felt driven to go to the office and tell my wife that I was getting ready to leave. This was unusual for me since it had become our routine to head out after a busy day of harvesting. As I turned the doorknob and opened the door, a sense of discomfort began to settle in my stomach. I felt a strange sense that something was wrong. When the door opened, I was hit by a sudden and intense wave of emotions. It was as if time had slowed down, allowing me to take in every detail of the scene unfolding before me. There, in the middle of it all, was my wife, the person I had trusted the most, inappropriately involved with our adopted son. My heart pounded in my chest as shock and disbelief swept over me like an unexpected wave. My mind struggled to grasp what I was seeing, and I was suddenly filled with a mix of anger, pain, and a deep sense of betrayal. These emotions mingled together, leaving me feeling almost numb. I couldn't control myself, my hands balled into fists, and I took deep, heavy breaths. It was as if a wave of energy rushed through me, making me feel slightly dizzy. For a moment, it seemed like I was frozen in time, detached from my environment. The room appeared blurry at the edges, my attention narrowing to the upsetting scene in front of me. Initially, I wanted to yell, to demand an explanation, and to let out the turmoil within me. Yet, there was another part of me that wished to look away, to deny what my eyes were seeing, and to hold on to the hope that it wasn't real. As the seconds passed, it became clear that I couldn't avoid facing the situation. Realization hit me forcefully, pulling me out of my initial state of shock and pushing me into a more resolved mindset. Tears gathered in my eyes, a blend of sorrow and frustration, ready to overflow. My voice shook as I gathered the courage to ask my question, which carried a sense of openness and vulnerability I hadn't felt in a long time. What's happening? My adopted son couldn't meet my gaze directly, guilt and surprise visible on his face. My wife turned her attention toward me, her eyes showing shame, regret, and a rare sign of defiance. A deep silence filled the air, only broken by the uneven rhythm of my breaths. In that moment, it struck me profoundly: everything had changed. The firm foundation of trust that our relationship was built on had crumbled, and there was no way to repair it. Betrayal seemed to radiate from both my wife and my adopted son. Anger coursed through me as I grabbed him by the neck and forcefully removed him from the room, my wife's screams echoing in my ears as she tried to intervene. My fury was so intense that I felt a strong desire to hurt him, but I managed to hold back. I sternly warned him that there would be consequences if he ever entered our house again. Having said that, I walked away, leaving behind a storm of intense pain and confusion. In the midst of this overwhelming emotional turmoil, I headed to the bar to be with my friends, hoping to momentarily forget the shocking scene one had just witnessed. At that moment, I had no desire to be alone, although it was difficult not to think about what had happened. The weight of the situation felt oppressive, and the intensity of my emotions was almost too much to handle. At the bar, I tried to drown out my thoughts, but they were hard to completely shut out. The sheer scale of it all was simply too vast. The recurring question that echoed in my mind was how long this had been going on. We had adopted him at the age of 14, and he was nearly 19 when I discovered the truth, but it was impossible to pinpoint exactly how long the affair had lasted. Eventually, the turmoil inside my head grew so intense that I decided to return home early. The urge to confront my wife and face the harsh reality of the situation became too overwhelming to ignore. Upon my arrival at home, my wife was missing, and it was clear that my adopted son had packed his belongings and left as well. It was at this moment that the full weight of the situation hit me, and I could no longer hold back the tears. The enormity of my son's betrayal and how my wife had spiraled into a destructive path, ultimately leading to the collapse of our family, became painfully clear. I called my daughter and described the troubling scene one had witnessed involving her mother. Surprisingly, she wasn't shocked by the news. She revealed that she had already suspected something unusual was going on between them, even though she hadn't actually seen it. Unlike my daughter, who was ready to confront the situation, my wife showed cowardice. She avoided coming home for several months and ignored all communication attempts. When my daughter finally reached out to her, my wife first claimed it was a mistake, but later confessed that her feelings for our adopted son had deepened and she had developed romantic feelings for him. She expressed her fear of how I would react to this revelation. My daughter informed me that both my wife and our adopted son were staying at an undisclosed hotel, adding to my confusion and disorientation. Despite dedicating my life to managing and operating the farm, I legally owned nothing since my wife had inherited it from her grandparents. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. Feeling lost and uncertain, I examined our business accounts and discovered that a significant amount of money had been recently withdrawn. In response, I withdrew the remaining funds and opened a new business account to prevent her from accessing it. The weight of the situation left me deeply conflicted. I had always envisioned retiring on the farm, but now I faced a dilemma. If I were to file for divorce, I understood that I would likely lose everything I had invested in. Despite having enough money saved to support myself until I reached the age of 80, my passion for my work was still strong. I decided to consult a divorce lawyer to seek advice on how to proceed with the marriage. The lawyer's counsel was to stay married due to the potential financial losses I might incur if I chose to leave. I hesitated to make our situation public, considering our limited family connections and the impact it could have on our small community. Throughout this ordeal, my daughter stood by my side, providing unwavering support that meant the world to me. Her presence was reassuring. Then, out of the blue, my wife called me after about 2 months had passed. During the call, she expressed her desire to come back home and offered an apology for her betrayal. She also mentioned undergoing therapy with the intention of mending our marriage. To be honest, I had some troubling thoughts. The urge to divorce her immediately was strong, but the potential losses held me back. The moment I witnessed her in that situation, all the love and respect I had for her disappeared. My heart seemed to harden, and I even entertained disturbing thoughts of harming her to gain control of everything. The idea of having her back was almost unbearable, but for the memory and sake of my late son, I consciously pushed those dark thoughts away. At present, my plan is to allow my wife to return, but things have changed significantly. Since I discovered her actions, I've developed a plan to acquire my own land and establish my own cattle herd. Since the passing of my son, her focus has shifted away from the business, and I've taken over the role of managing its operations. I'm the one who understands the complex logistics, maintains customer relationships, and manages the supply chain. While she has contributed, I've essentially been building wealth for her. Now, my attention is turning towards my own well-being. I'm actively working on starting my independent ventures over the next couple of years. My goal is to create something free from her influence. Ultimately, I'm preparing myself for the possibility of divorce by that time if she is still alive. This decision is centered around my own future and finding a way to move forward independently. So folks, what's your opinion on this? Do you believe this gentleman should compromise his dignity to keep his farm, or should he consider divorce, risking the loss of everything? Hello, my life is in complete disarray, and I have no one to turn to for help except you, fellow internet users. Let me provide you with some context. Just over a month ago, my husband Troy, 31 years old, decided to host a wine and dine event with our circle of friends to mark our 3rd anniversary. I wasn't entirely convinced it was a good idea, but he was determined to throw a party to celebrate us. It might sound peculiar, but at that moment, all I could think about was whether his best friend would attend. During a previous night out together, he kept giving me suggestive glances while dancing at the club. He even signaled for me to join him on the dance floor while Troy was in the restroom dealing with a stomach ache. I declined his dance invitation, but we had all consumed quite a bit of alcohol, and he appeared quite attractive with his shirt unbuttoned all the way down. In that instant, I felt a shift in our relationship. I wasn't sure how I would feel when I saw him at the party, as I hadn't encountered him since that night, and a few weeks had passed. I wanted to address the moments that had transpired between us and move past them. A little background is in order. Troy's best friend, Mitch, 34 years old, has been friends with him for 20 years, and I've known Mitch for as long as I've known Troy. However, for the first 2 years of my relationship with my husband, Mitch and I were just platonic friends. But after we got married, it seemed like Mitch was afraid of losing his best friend to marriage. He started accompanying us on almost all our trips and frequently brought along various women since he didn't want to commit to one. My feelings for him remained strictly as a friend, but everything changed after that night at the club. On that particular evening, Troy made a heartfelt toast expressing his love for me and his excitement about having children together. I was overwhelmed with embarrassment and excused myself to the guest bathroom to compose myself. As I was about to leave the bathroom, Mitch followed me in, and what transpired next wasn't something I had planned for. The pleasure was so intense that I couldn't control myself. The thrill of knowing that everyone else was outside while we were engaged in an intimate encounter inside, trying to remain discreet, was oddly exciting. It continued for another 15 minutes until I heard a knock on the door followed by Troy calling my name. Instantly, guilt washed over me. I pushed Mitch away and pretended I was fixing my appearance. A couple of minutes later, I left the bathroom with him following me. About 30 minutes afterward, we made sure Troy didn't suspect anything. The most troubling aspect of this whole situation is that it wasn't a one-time occurrence. 2 days ago, a week after the party, Mitch came over while Troy was at the gym late. We engaged in an intimate encounter, and it was in the middle of it that I heard Troy entering the room and catching us in the act. My husband had a complete breakdown right in front of us while we were lying in our bed naked, desperately trying to cover ourselves. It was a horrifying insight, however. He quickly regained his composure and became very angry. Troy physically confronted Mitch and forcibly removed him from our house at 1 a.m., completely naked in the freezing -5-degree weather. Then, he turned to me and said that I would be sleeping on the couch. He promptly gathered my belongings and threw them into the living room. I didn't have much choice and spent a restless 2 days on the couch. 48 hours later, I received a text from him with a link to a PDF containing a plane ticket. I opened it to find a ticket for a flight from New York to Orlando scheduled for a week from that day. I couldn't believe I had jeopardized a relationship that I had built over 5 years, with 3 of those years being married, for a mere 5-minute mistake. What should I do? I still have a week to try and mend things, as I can't go back to live with my grandparents and I can't confide in anyone, which is why I'm seeking your advice here. Update: I've tried to communicate with him, but he's isolating himself in the room, not going to work, not coming out for meals. It's been 36 hours since I received the plane ticket, and during this time, I haven't eaten or slept. I haven't even changed my clothes because I don't want to make a mess in the living room. I knocked on his door throughout the night, but he didn't respond. All I could hear was the TV playing inside. Finally, he came out and stood at the doorway of the living room. I asked if he had eaten anything and mentioned that I had prepared 2 sandwiches for him, which he looked at as if they were repulsive. Then he returned to his room without a word. Update: I awoke realizing it was the day before my scheduled flight. On the coffee table, I noticed bags filled with new clothes and an envelope. Curiosity led me to open one of the bags, and inside I found the remainder of my belongings, even my miniature collection. Tears welled up in my eyes as the reality of the situation hit me. He hasn't spoken to me and has been coming home late. I've been cooking for both of us, but I end up eating alone. I often wake up to the sound of him returning home, only to see him head straight to his room. We haven't had any conversations at all. It's astonishing how everything is unraveling so abruptly. I just wish I could understand what's going on in his mind. Is he contemplating divorce? I pray that's not the case because it would be a devastating blow from which I fear I might never recover. It's been a month since I had to leave our shared home and move in with my grandparents. He still hasn't communicated with me. I've sent him over 500 texts, but I'm deeply concerned about his well-being. He has blocked me on all platforms. However, a friend he still follows on Instagram mentioned that he posts stories of himself hiking with his work friends. This eases my worries about his safety. Today I received a large envelope, and upon opening it, I discovered the divorce papers I had been dreading, along with a letter. I haven't read the letter yet, nor have I signed the divorce papers. Edit: I've read the letter, it was heart-wrenching. I couldn't bring myself to continue reading beyond the first page. In it, he expressed his deep love for me and our life together. The letter spanned 3 pages, but I couldn't bear to go beyond the first page. I completed reading the letter. In it, he mentioned that he would be taking time off from work to prioritize his well-being and that he intends to block me on all platforms. He also mentioned that I should sign the divorce papers and send them back to our address. However, I don't want to do that. I just want him back. I feel terrible for being with someone else other than my husband. It wasn't supposed to happen. I blame myself for this situation and genuinely can't imagine my life without him. It has been 4 days since I received the divorce papers, and I have signed them.